Welcome to this video of how to basically take apart a Triumph 250 from the early 1930s and how to put it back together again. This video is going to show you the disassembly process that I used on this Triumph L2/1. Now this is one of the 250 Val Page Triumphs from the early 1930s, and the L means it was the lightweight version, and they tended to be used more for racing because they were slightly lighter because of the L. But however, when they found out that the bike wasn't that competitive, the lightweight version actually sold really well because it was a lot cheaper to make, and so therefore it had some success as a standard 250. And this is it as it came home. You can see it's just sitting on the trailer there. I had taken the headlight off just to make sure it didn't get broken on the way in. But it had compression, but it would not start at all. So I needed to take out the engine. I wanted to strip it anyway to make sure it was okay. So this is the front view of the engine. It's held on with fish plates, and so it's very easy to take the engine out. You just disassemble the fish plates. There's this bar here which holds the cylinder head to the front of the down tube, but that's the front view of the engine in its entirety. Side view again, you just disassemble the bolts on the fish plates here, and the engine comes straight out, and I've left the Magneto and everything else fully intact on it. I had taken off the carburetor simply because I tend to like to take the carbs off and treat them separately, and so you can see that's missing from this part here, but apart from that it's a complete engine. This is the right hand side of the engine, and again you can see the fish plates and the state that they're in, but again it's a very simple engine to take out of a motorcycle, as they all tended to be at that time, in that era. The top here you can see that there is a stay. This is the stay between the top of the cam and the cam covers and the engine and the frame itself, and it was quite common on vehicles of this size and of that era. You can see there's the oil feeds into the rocker cover here, and again into the valves, and again that was quite a common feed. Again, this is the other side, and you can see here that this is the oil feed into the rockers themselves. I should have mentioned that earlier. And this little adjuster here is the device that controls the pressure, controls the flow of oil into both of these rocker covers. So you tend to get a very good feed up to this point, and that's like a little needle valve in it. And so once you've got the oil running everywhere else, you make sure that this has got the right drip feed into these two rockers at the top. If you have that wide open, you flood the top of the engine, and the rest of the engine tends not to get the correct amount of oil. And if you have it too tight, then you obviously starve the upper part of the engine with oil. So it's important to get that set right, but you can only do that once it's running, and you do that visually. The right hand side of the engine, you have this Cush drive system where you can see these like wavy cam shapes, and that's got a spring, and that basically allows the shock of the direct drivetrain coming through not to be transferred to the crank. And so what I wanted to do is I just wanted to, when I disassembled it, I wanted a photograph to show the order that everything went in and which orientation these spacers and these bushes were when I took the engine apart. This is the right hand cover. I'd taken off the outer cover off here, and I've taken this main cover off, and this is the oil pump system. And the oil pump system is a very ingenious little device in that this aluminium piece is driven by the crankshaft, and the crankshaft rotates around here and it moves this backwards and forwards, and as that moves backwards and forwards it drives these two little pistons, and these pistons suck oil out and then pump them back into the engine. One of them is a suction, and what that does is that keeps a dry sump, and what it does is it makes sure that the sump is always free of oil, and it pumps the oil back into a tank that's on the side of the engine. And the other one is the actual pump itself, which gets primed through the bottom. There's a little block that fits on the bottom of here, and that then feeds the rest of the engine. So you actually have two pumps in one that scavenges from the sump of the engine itself and feeds the tank, and one that then feeds clean oil back into the engine. This was the reason that the engine wasn't running. This is the drive shaft from the right hand side of the crank, and you can see that it's completely sheared off. This pinion here drives both the cams and the timing and the Magneto. So obviously if you have no If this is disconnected from the end of the crank will turn round, it will kick over and it will have compression, but you won't have any movement of the valves and you won't have any spark. So I was very lucky that when I kicked the thing over that I didn't actually bend any valves, but that would have been the first thing I was looking for when I took it apart. This is the right hand side of the engine, and this, you can see here, this is where the crankshaft, that pin should have been. There's the end of the crankshaft is coming out of that hole there. You have two gears that sit in here that are driven from that one that operate these valve push rods, and then those then drive this idler gear, which drives this gear, which runs the Magneto. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward, but again, it's all gear driven. There's no count, there's no chains in here, there's no belts, it's all gear driven, and it all looks pretty good in there. These are the gears themselves from the other side, and you can see these are the two camshafts that bump those push rods. You then have the little pin that fits through here that drives the oil pumps, and then that's the housing for the idler gear, and that's the opening for the end of the Magneto. This is the Magneto drive. You can see there's a cork seal on here that feeds against there. This is because the Magneto itself can move all over the place, and you need to make sure that the timing of this on this shaft is critical. So this seal here allows this to run in a bath of oil. It doesn't have an oil level as such, it just gets oil spray, so you don't need an O-ring in here. You just have the simple cork seal that prevents the oil from leaking out basically into the atmosphere. This is the crankshaft. You can see it's in reasonable condition. The important things here are you have a spline that drives the gears you saw earlier, and you have a thread that ties the nut on. You have two halves of the crankshaft. These are all pressed together. You have the connecting rod, and then you have this piece here which should be attached. You can see it isn't, and that's how it should look on the right hand side, but that you can see this part is obviously disconnected, and that's really where we are with the disassembly of the engine. The other side of the crankshaft is good, but you can see how it is a modular assembly. It's not a solid crank. This piece here is pressed into this flywheel, and then you can see the pin is pressed in as well, and that is also for a separate counterweight if you needed that. These are the engine casings. Again, they're just bolted in half, so it's not split vertically, it's split horizontally. And I've just, when I pulled them apart, you can see how the assembly is put together, and you can see lots and lots of sealant being used to actually make sure the thing actually holds together. This is the scavenger pump that draws oil from the dry sump into the pumping system that then gets pumped into the tank at the side. And these are the two bushes that hold the camshafts that then drive these push rods for the valves, and then this is the plate here that the Magneto sits on. These are the cam itself. You have these sleeves that protect the movement of the push rods as they go up and down, and again you can see how the system at the top gets put together. This is the exhaust valve lifter, which helps you when you're kicking it over, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem, but with a small engine like this, but it's always been put in there so that it does two things. It allows the engine to be kicked over and simply with the exhaust valve lifted, and it also serves as a device for stopping the engine. There's the top of the engine, and you can see the springs, the valves, the collets, and the likes. Nothing really too fancy about that, very, very standard. And you can see the banjo bolts for the oil feed. And again, this is the right hand side of the engine with the rocker cover taken off, and I've stripped everything out of that. And then again, there you can see the various components that has come apart. This is the cylinder head itself. We'll cover that in a bit more detail later, but it's relatively clean, relatively straightforward. And again, that's the left hand side of the engine with the straps that hold down the Magneto and the alternator. There's the piston I've taken off, and again you can see the left hand side of the engine with the, again, plenty of sealant involved. And that's it from the outside. Nothing too fancy about it, but again you can see how the Magneto straps are actually bolted through this fancy plate at the side. This is an engine breather, so it's just an elbow and normally on here you'll have a piece of pipe with some kind of filter device on the top of it. It's normally just a straightforward gauze, and that's what we've got on there. And there's my box of bits ready to be stripped, cleaned, and rebuilt. And that will be part 2 of this video.